Am I allowed to ask a question now?
We do have a few minutes for discussion, but yes, go ahead.
Well, this is a question for Hector. Abuse includes treating franchisees differently. Well, for me, it is essential that franchisors have the ability to treat franchisees differently. One could be a very large franchisee, one very small, one very successful, one unsuccessful, one always in breach, the other never in breach except for this one occasion. So why should treating franchisees the same be so important?
No, in this case, what happened was that they decided to change all the network. Not exactly, was the opposite. Not for one franchisee, but for the whole franchisee. So probably what happened there was that the franchisor had an arrangement with this supplier to cover all his franchise.
So we have about 5 minutes left. So
Eh?
5 minutes left.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
No,
I know, but it's just she's our chair, so.
Okay.
So in Belgium, 3 conditions need to be fulfilled for an infringement of the law. The first one being a situation of economic dependence, the second an abuse, and the third, importantly, also an effect on the Belgian market. So as to the first condition, we have a definition in the law that you can see there on the slide. The main criterion is similar to other countries, and it's the absence of reasonable alternatives, allowing a company to impose some conditions that could not be obtained under normal market circumstances. It is a factual situation, of course, and in order to assess the situation, the parliamentary debates have provided a list of some factors that can be checked. And of course, the more these factors are present, the more there will be a risk of a situation of economic dependence. Now, these factors are, for instance, the market power of the stronger party in the relationship. And here, maybe interesting is to know that there is no minimum market share that is needed to be in a strong position. So no 30%, not like in abuse of dominant position. Second example of a factor, you have the brand reputation. The more the brand is known, the more there is a risk of economic dependence. You can also have the know-how that is transmitted to the weaker party. So that kind of factors that you can find in the parliamentary debates. What is interesting is that in these parliamentary debates, there is also an express referral to the situation, the relationship between a franchisor and a franchisee, as example of contract in which an economic dependence may occur. So my feeling is that whenever a franchisee will raise this law, the judges will the franchisee will refer to these parliamentary debates, and that there is a high risk that this first condition will be fulfilled because just it is a franchisee in a franchise agreement. Then we have the abuse. There I can be quite short. There is no definition in the law of what an abuse may be, but the law provides, again, a list. In Belgium we like some lists of examples of what an abuse may be, and you have those the lists on the slide. I will just refer to the first one, the refusing of sales, because in the case law, so I told you the law is quite recent, 2020. We only have 8 decisions that were published yet, and most of the decisions are related to cases of refusing of sales. We have no case law about franchising, so unfortunately I cannot give you an example. But then I want to talk to you again shortly about the third condition that is important in Belgium. So this is the effect on the Belgian market, or a significant part of the market. It is not an actual effect, but it is a potential effect. So the threshold is quite low, but the claimant, so the weaker party, is supposed to provide a market analysis just to demonstrate that there is an effect on the market.
Thank you, Pierre. Very quickly on the consequences. In Italy, under Italian law, the consequences are that the pact is null and void with possible damages granted by ordinary court. And the antitrust authority can impose sanctions up to 10% of the turnover of the companies involved. What I would like just to mention, as I said, case law in general is not really seen cases of this, but I'm more worried about the position taken by the antitrust authority. Also because in all the cases I have mentioned, all the franchisors, apart from Benetton, decided, in order to close the proceeding, decided to accept to amend its contract in certain ways according to what was assumed to be challenged by the authority. And it is likely that these proceedings will be closed very quickly. So we will only have a decision on the Benetton case, which is expected by the 15th of July this year. The problem is that if all franchisors are doing that, and I perfectly understand the reasons why they do, it is more difficult to have decisions that could be challenged on the merits and the application. Thank you.
Well, regarding Spain, the effects are established in the unfair competition law are the same for all the unfair competition acts. The declaration that the conduct constitutes an unfair competition act, the cessation of the prohibition of the conduct, the removal of the effects, it is possible, and above all, the compensation of damages.
Uruguay?
Yes, in Uruguay, consequences would be typically contractual and connected with termination of contracts, early termination of contracts, probably connected with the idea of that the franchisee is not amenable to accept these new conditions for the franchisor, and courts in certain cases using this idea of the abuse of right or the damages to compensate franchisees.
Belgium?
In Belgium, a victim of an infringement can choose between either file a complaint with the Belgian Competition Authority, because the abuse of economic dependence is a competition infringement in Belgium. And so the Belgian Competition Authority may conduct some investigations, may impose some preliminary measures, and also order some fines up to 2% of the global turnover of the infringing company. I'm talking about the global turnover worldwide. And the other option for a victim is go before the commercial courts, before the cease and desist judge, juge de cessation in French, stakingsvordering, rechter in Dutch. And this judge may declare null and void some irregular clauses, may also order that those clauses may not be applied, and also grant some damages. Now, until now, there is no decision by the Belgian Competition Authority in Belgium, and only 8, like I said, by the commercial courts. And in most of the cases, the commercial courts rejected the claim because of the third condition that is problematic in Belgium. And the judge explained that they do not receive proper market analysis from the parties. So they try to avoid the debate, and so they just reject by saying the third condition is not fulfilled. And on the other hand, we have one decision in which this condition was even not examined by the court because it was too difficult. But the court granted in that case, so that's interesting. I don't know what you should do, but no, but what we definitely should do is wait for a first decision by the Belgian Competition Authority that will give us some guidelines in order to examine the third condition. So let's hope that this decision will come soon. Wait and see.
And come out the way we want to, yeah.
So, just to say that in the further slides, we have put all the indications of the relevant case law for each jurisdiction, and of course you will receive all the slides and you can keep it for your information. Thank you.
Before we switch to the next panel, questions for this? Oh my gosh, yes. We'll start with, yeah.
It's not a question, it's a remark, and I would like to follow Jean Pratt. For me, from the German law point of view, everything that you presented seems to be quite normal for me. We have more or less the same situation in Germany. It's all laid down in the law. We have rules in our antitrust law concerning companies in a dominant market position, and we have other rules, and we have rules for companies with a relative market power, and it's extremely widely. There's no dissent. Everybody accepts franchisors have a relative market power towards their franchisees, and then it's already in the law. If you are in this situation, you can't distinguish between. You can't discriminate. You have to treat everybody who is in the same situation in the same way. That is completely, everybody accepts it. There is no discussion about it. So for us, for me, I was a bit astonished that that seems to be so problematic for you. In Germany, we accept it.
Yes, actually, it's kind of a doubt and a question, because I see that most of the examples that were outlined had to deal with how the agreement was developing. But my question is, what happens in your jurisdictions when the agreement is presented to the franchisee? It comes with all these abusive clauses, and the franchisee says very happily, yes, I take them. So they know there's arms negotiations. They're supposed to be sophisticated. They're supposed to be. I mean, there was no hidden numbers on the circular letter or anything like that. But they knew. I mean, it's not a matter of nuance after that we sign. Now I'm giving you extra prices on the meat for the hamburgers. Nothing like that. It's just that they know it's like that. That doesn't change the view that you have expressed.
Yeah. If I can say. Yeah, this is the reason why I'm a bit concerned about this situation, because to me it must be very clear that one thing is the unbalanced contract. So to sign the unbalanced contract, we have at least in Italy we have the protection of the pre-contractual information and whatever to protect the franchisee to make the right choice, to get all the information, and that's it. Once he has signed, okay, if we have during the relationship there is a situation in which he is obliged to make further investments and so like, and then he is because he is in a burdensome condition and he has difficult to exit, and in some cases can be this situation. I'm not saying that there is never this situation. We cannot have this situation in franchising, but not just you cannot just infer this situation of economic dependence just from the fact that the franchisor is just one supplier, so the franchisee is obliged to buy everything from him, and there is an unbalanced contract, because otherwise we have always an economic dependence in all franchising contracts, which according to Italian case law is not the case, because after analyzing the cases one by one, etc., the courts almost all cases, and I have seen many cases, finally decided that not, in fact, there was not that situation that could arise. And if arises, and in fact, the franchisee is in a very difficult situation, which is due not just from the contract signed at the beginning, but the development of the relationship during the year. And in that situation, the franchisor is abusing because, for example, he's imposing bad conditions for the purchase of the prices, changing the conditions and imposing for that would be a situation of abuse of economic dependence, in my view. But not just the simple analysis which seems to be made by the Italian antitrust authority just based on the contracts, because for that there are other type of protection by law. This is my view, but of course it depends, and it is more complicated than that. But after analyzing many cases, it's a bit worrying that just to but it seems from what you say in your jurisdiction that in many cases the situation of a franchisee of franchising contracts is per se an economic dependence. So it depends maybe from...
Yeah, but an economic dependence is not, it's a normal situation. That is, there must be an abuse of this economic dependence. And as the example, as when you don't give, well, indeed, I think if you don't provide all the stock, for example, is a breach of the contract because the franchisor must supply the goods, or then I think it's, well, at least in Spain, you have to analyze the abuse, and it's not very common. In fact, the case law in franchise, the two judgments that I told you before, it's, well, it's not so very common that it's considered to be an abuse.
Yes, just one word on this. I think that one problem is that we start perhaps with the false idea that we are in a collaboration contract between two parties that are in a similar situation and an equal situation. So perhaps what you are describing of your jurisdiction is better because it's not we are not starting from this point. Perhaps in certain cases we have a lot of clauses because as we know, contracts, franchising contracts are more and more detailed or making details on the situations. But what happened here is we have some idea of an excessive use of these rights, right? As I described, and but fortunately we will have this because we have worked on these matters. Thank you.
Since everybody answered, I will answer too. So you were talking about unbalanced clauses and one party knowing that the clauses are unbalanced. Well, I give you a litigator answer. So I can imagine if you go to court, well, that the defendant, so the infringing company, will have to demonstrate an abuse of the claimant invoking the law. And I think it will be very difficult because the judge will stick to the law and will not accept, that's my personal view, an abuse in that case.
I'm sorry, I know there are additional questions, but we have run out of time for the panel and the discussion. So maybe in the coffee break you can discuss with the later on. Yeah. No,
Sure.
thank you to the panel for a
pleasure.
very, very interesting discussion. To the next presentation, not to keep you from the coffee break, which is afterwards. And we are, I think I had a discussion yesterday with somebody who's not from the EU about Bieber. That sounds like Bieber, like Justin Bieber. Not nearly as entertaining, and also very confusing, when it's all new to all of us. But so I'm very happy that we have Silvia here that can tell us more about how Bieber, not D. Bieber, but Bieber, applies to franchising.
Thank you. First of all, I was not supposed to give this presentation, and I'm sorry. I don't want to give the impression that I'm doing everything myself. But in fact, Alistair Gray, who the representative of the European Franchise Federation, told us just a few days ago that he couldn't come. So we tried to find other alternatives, and I didn't feel really to ask people at the last moment to jump in and take his. So that's why I'm here. So okay. So the impact of the new antitrust rule on franchising. So very quickly, I will. Of course, some of the themes have been already discussed yesterday. I will briefly mention dual distribution. Of course, a franchisor providing online intermediation services to franchisees, territorial restrictions, so in selective system and exclusive systems, the new definition of active sales, and the online restrictions. So this would be more or less, these are more or less the new provisions. So starting with dual distribution, you have heard yesterday all the information regarding these new provisions. Actually, I mean, even with under the previous regulation, of course, the franchise agreement is a vertical agreement between a franchisor and franchisee. So it's it's a non-reciprocal, typically non-reciprocal agreements, because only the franchisee is supplied by the franchisor and not vice versa. And it was in the past it was exempted because both parties are competitors only at the downstream level, but not at the upstream level. So that was sufficient until the last regulation to say that even if they are potential competitors at the downstream level, they are exempt. These contracts are exempted. Now we have this new provision, Article 2.5 of the new regulation, which introduced these conditions that actually after yesterday, I'm not sure if I have completely understood that they are cumulative and not alternative, because he was saying the negative, and if you try to read this, you always turn. But in any case, in order to be exempted, the exchange of information between the two parties, it is required that the exchange of information is either directly related to the implementation of the vertical agreements or necessary to improve the production or distribution of the contract of goods and services. This was explained yesterday. There are, in any case, a list of examples in the guidelines of indications, information that is likely to fulfill the two conditions. Example of exchange of type of informations, the exchange of which should be in principle not fulfilling the conditions, and other examples. I will not go through all of them, but other examples, the guidelines paragraph 100, that is unlikely to fulfill the two conditions. So of course there are some relevant, important aspects in these, of course, on the exchange of information between franchisor and franchisee, which are typical and necessary for the network to be efficient and to work efficiently. First of all, we must say, and it was also mentioned yesterday by the representative of the Commission, that and it was already mentioned in the previous version of the guidelines, and it is quite clear, expressly quite clear in the guidelines and paragraph 98 now, that in franchise agreements, the exchange of information is often justified by the need to keep and maintain a uniform business model across the franchise network. So this means that it is an indication that, of course, the Commission, or in any case the antitrust authority, would consider this aspect while evaluating the situation. In any case, what are the consequences in case of exchange of information which does not fulfill the two conditions? There would be an individual assessment, as there may be an individual assessment, possible application of the de minimis notice, so that could be important if franchisors have not a very high quota di market share. And then, this is also important, the other provisions of the vertical agreement can still benefit from the exemption. So this is also, and then the guidelines give some indication on how to take precautions to minimize the risk. So, as it was said yesterday, certainly it is very important for the franchisors to make a clear evaluation, an in-depth evaluation of all the information exchange, because we have, of course, all the problems of softwares and so all the information exchanges, particularly regarding the customers, and so it is clearly important. But at least we know that the benefits and the authorities and the Commission are aware that the franchising needs a special exchange of information for its functioning. So, getting to that, to the franchisor acting as online intermediation service provider, as we have seen yesterday in our panel, we mentioned that, Jordi was mentioning that. Of course, if the franchisor is creating a platform in order to allow its franchisees to sell through the platform, in principle he would be regarded as online intermediation service provider, and all the rules we mentioned yesterday would be applied. So that, because of course he will have an hybrid function, because he will at the same time be selling its own products, and the franchisees in the same platform will sell the same products. So based on that, in principle, it could not benefit from the exception on dual distribution and all the with the consequence we have seen before. However, it is important to note the paragraph 109 of the guidelines, which seems to refer clearly to a case of a franchise, to this specific case, because it says, this is not quoted, just summarized, but if it seems to say that if there is no restriction by object or significant market power of the franchisor and in relevant market from the provision of the online services for such goods and services, it is unlikely that the Commission will prioritize enforcement action. So this also gives some space to the franchisors to know that, of course, they are not, but clearly it is not a clear safe harbor as it was said yesterday, but in any case an indication, an important indication. So, having said that, with this on this first part, the other important amendments introduced by the new Weber are okay. In order to get there, I will so to the territorial restrictions, to the new provisions on territorial restrictions. I will start with the vertical restraints in franchise agreements. Of course, the franchise agreements falls in principle under the definition of the vertical agreements, but again, it is important that the guidelines states quite clearly that franchising agreement, due to their specific characteristic, in most cases fall outside the scope of Article 111 of the treaty. And this, of course, it is also established by the Pronuptia case decision, but it is also quite clearly mentioned in the vertical in the guidelines. So and even in the framework of the WIBER, so when the WIBER is applicable, as I mentioned before, the Commission in the guidelines seems to indicate that since, of course, several of the typical restrictions in franchising agreements are justified for the certain reasons, and of course there is the need to have the network, the franchise network functioning, and it is, of course, this is a consequence of a collaboration between the parties, exchange, etc., and the transfer of know-how, which is, of course, an important aspect considered by under antitrust rules in order to justify certain restrictions. So, for example, the non-compete obligation, the fact that in franchise agreement typically the franchisee is buying all its products from the same source, it is normally accepted, although not specifically consistent with the non-compete rule, and also it is accepted that the duration is extended to the all the duration of the franchise agreement without the limitation of the 5 years, and this was already before in the previous guidelines, but it is an indication in any case that there is a different approach. So other, for example, the provision are accepted other provisions necessary for maintaining the uniformity of the network, but this was already before, just to give an idea, and the importance of the transfer of know-how, for example, for the post-term non-compete obligation of 1 year, which is, of course, and it was already before, but just to say that it was already before, in my view, and it is confirmed and clarified also here, that there is a different approach to regard the vertical restrictions and vertical in franchise agreements, considering the specificity of this type of contract. So, going to the territorial restrictions, of course, these new rules have introduced different rules on applicable on Article 4. So the hardcore restrictions, the exception to the hardcore restrictions refer to different type of distribution channels. So exclusive distribution, selective distribution, and they introduce also the free distribution and the integration between some. Before there were not accepted some restrictions, but now there are different type of restrictions are accepted if they are imposed to one category in order to protect the other one as in different ways. I will not enter into all the details of this, but just referring to franchising contracts. The guidelines at paragraph 167 clearly says that depending on the distribution model chosen by the franchisor, example selective or exclusive, the relevant rules on territorial restrictions will apply. So what is a selective franchise system? Because of course in some cases, as we have all seen, we lawyers, we have seen in some cases there is a clear choice in favor of franchisors in favor of the selective franchise contract. So they decide that they want to have a selective contract to be applied where all the rules on the selective distribution apply. In other cases, the choice is not made very clearly, or it is not indicated, or and so it is not so clear if the franchisor has made a choice in favor of the exclusive and the selective. And exclusive, actually, franchise exclusive contracts, I have seen very rarely this type of contracts in the way, of course, it is indicated by the Commission. In the sense, what is selective franchise system? Of course, a franchise agreement that results in closed network where the franchisees are prohibited from selling to non-franchisees must be assessed under the principle applicable to selective distribution. So, of course, if we choose the selective system, there must be the cross sales left free, or as we will see in this case. But what is an exclusive franchise system? According to the guidelines, a franchise agreement that grants territorial exclusivity and protection from active sales by other franchisees must be assessed under the principle applicable to exclusive distribution. So, I don't know, I will be happy to hear your views and experience on that, but from what I have seen, in many cases, there are, of course, in franchise agreement, a territorial protection in the sense that the franchisor agreed not to open a shop in a certain area of the franchisee, or not to be open also by other franchisees in that area. But to protect in the sense of preventing the other franchisees to make active sales in the territory, this is my view. I have seen in some type of agreements, for example, in how can I say, in settore immobiliare? Real estate more. But in other type, there is mostly the first requirement, but not all. I mean, a real situation of exclusivity, real exclusivity with protection from the active sales of all the others franchisees. So, having said that, and I will then be very happy to have your opinion on this, what are the consequences? Of course, if there is a selective franchise agreement, a selective franchise network, the franchisee and customers, here I think that the extension to the customer is not really relevant if we are at a level of retail franchisees, of course, can be restricted from making active sales to exclusive territories allocated to other buyers or the suppliers outside the franchise system. So, of course, if the franchisor has other areas where it has not franchising, but an exclusive system. Franchisees and customers can be restricted from making active and passive sales to non-authorized resellers within the franchise selective system. Franchisees must remain free to make active and passive sales to any other authorized franchisees at all levels. So, for example, if we have a master franchisee supplying the product, this should be included in the cross sales, as well as, of course, to end users within the system. Possible protection from the outside to non-authorized franchisees, because, of course, the franchisor will be entitled to impose to other free or exclusive distributors of other territories not to sell to non-authorized franchisees or resellers in the franchise agreement. Possible restrictions for the wholesalers to sell, this was already before, to end users. Of course, it is possible to limit this resale. Possible location clause, as it was already before, but of course we all know that it does not cover online sales, but just offline sales. If we have, okay, what are the critical issues, in my view, in this framework of selective network. First of all, which territory is covered by the franchise system? Because it seems to me that applying the rules on selective distribution, the selective market is all the market. So if we apply this to the franchising, if I have franchisees in France, Germany, and Holland, I need to leave them to allow the cross supply between all of them, because in my view it is regarded as a whole franchise system and not, of course, different franchise systems in different territories. Reservation of a territory for future expansion of the franchise selective system. This could be an interesting aspect, because of course we have the problem in selective distribution and franchising when it is used in this way, that if we do not cover all the countries in Europe, then there is the possibility that the product sold to third parties will come back of course, from free riding in the territory. So it is interesting, but it must be used carefully, in my view, the fact that the franchisor could reserve for the development of the franchise system part of the territory, other territories. And here then we come to the specificity. What does it mean? What do you need to do? Can you just say that you reserved all Europe or whatever? So this, of course, must be evaluated carefully. Then the coordination with different distribution channels of other territories. Of course, this is important now that there are all these restrictions that can be imposed in different systems. And the other aspect, critical aspect, is the prohibition to merge exclusive and selective systems. So, of course, it is typical in selective systems, and also when the franchisee are supplied by masters in different areas, of course, we have the problem that, according to antitrust, as we have seen also yesterday, the Commission is clearly contrary to the fact of deciding of that some retailers are supplied only by one source in one area. So of course it is not possible to consider in this case we think of a master, for example, so wholesaler, to be protected as he was an exclusive distributor from the sales of other masters of other areas of the network. So this could be critical, and it is an aspect that we have tried to discuss with them, but they didn't change. The territorial protection granted to the franchisee in a framework of a selective franchise system, that is another aspect which, in my view, going back to what I was saying before regarding the exclusive clauses, of course, since according to the Commission it is not possible to merge exclusive and selective rules, it could be challenged, the fact of having exclusive protection clauses if they are consistent with the selective. And I think that also because there are some indications in the guidelines that a protection like franchisor undertaking not to open new shops in the area are consistent with the selective system. But of course the other example I've made before, so to protect also by sales of the active sales of others franchisees would not be consistent with this. So of course, as a conclusion, it is very important to have a good coordination of all strategy in different markets and in the network. So, what are the consequences in case of the exclusive, if we choose the exclusive system? In fact, we will apply, of course, the rules on the exclusivity, the restrictions allowed in the exclusive system. So franchisees and customers can be restricted from making active sales to other exclusive franchisees, as well as to other exclusive buyers or to exclusive territory allocated to the supplier. Franchisees can be restricted from making active and passive sales to non-authorized resellers of a possible selective system. Possible location clause, as it was already before. Possible protection from active sales in the exclusive territory of the franchisees from outside, as I said, from free distributor and other exclusive distributors of other areas. Shared exclusivity, I don't see really how it could fit here, but of course there are also the rules on the shared exclusivity, so no more than 5 franchisee. I don't see it really, but not more than 5 distributors and active and passive sales to be left free among them. Okay, so how am I? Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. I've nearly finished. So we have seen that there is more space now to restrict online sales. We depart from a broader the fact that there is a broader definition of active sales, which is now in the regulation and not only in the guidelines as it was before. And we can infer from this, it clearly states that some of the behaviors that before were said as just passive sales, so all the online was seen as passive sale. Now we have examples of situations where in the online sales, for example, creating a website with the top level domain corresponding to a particular territory, offering on a website languages which are commonly used not commonly used in a particular country. So there are cases where the what before was seen as from us as an active sale, but from the authorities as passive. Now there is more space to consider active promotion and active sales that can be restricted within the limits, of course, of the rules. So as a consequence, there is also a new definition of online restrictions, which have been mentioned, of course, yesterday. And so we refer now to vertical agreements which directly or indirectly have as their object the prevention of the effective use of the internet, which is a very important improvement, because it is still possible, of course, for sales referred to specific territories and categories of customers. So if now it is possible, as you see from the other indications, other restrictions of the online sales are possible. Restrictions on online advertising that do not have the object of preventing the use of an entire online advertising channel are possible, of course, but it is essential that the franchisee is not, if we impose a restriction, of course, on online sales, is not prevented from an effective use of the internet. There are indications in the guidelines of what they see as an indirect restriction, or because, of course, all direct and indirect restriction cannot be allowed if, of course, the object is to prevent the other party from using effectively internet. On the other hand, on the contrary, specific restrictions are allowed, subject, of course, to certain conditions. So, for example, quality standard on online sales, prohibition to say in a specific marketplace, having one or more brick and mortar shop or showroom, selling a minimum quantity of products offline, if of course it is justified by objective criteria, and charge of different wholesale price for online and offline sales for different again if justified from different investments and costs. Of course, it is important to pay attention to the cumulative effect of the restrictions and, of course, on the main purpose. Thank you very much.
That's a lot to digest. Yeah, but please questions for Silvia for.
He said that it already was mentioned yesterday that a combination of selective and exclusive distribution is not allowed, and so I think if we use master franchising, we probably, or does it mean that we are obliged, and if then we have chosen, we will choose the way of selective or exclusive distribution, then probably we have to impose we have to impose one condition in the master franchise contract, that if we have chosen selective distribution, that the master franchisee has to keep this choice and not have another one, because then
to
keep this choice, so that he also has to do selective and not exclusive, because otherwise we will probably end before the European Commission.
Yeah, this is the main crazy thing, because we have discussed a lot with the commissions and I mean there were a lot of people arguing this, because apparently a wholesaler supplying the retailers in principle is not a selective distributor, because it's not selected based on quality criteria or whatever. It's just has just the role of supplying the goods, and if it was the supplier itself, there wouldn't be any problem, and that's why we have discussed and said to the Commission that it is also creating a difficulty for smaller franchisors or companies who are not able to create a subsidiary in each country, but they use wholesalers or master. So in that case, yes, the answer is that in any case they consider them as selective retailers, in the sense that there must be left free the cross-selling between all of them, at all level. So we cannot say he will supply that, and they clearly said that they don't want that there are suppliers of retailers in a specific territory with a protection, like a protection of exclusive protection, not even between them and others of the. So this is a bit critical, but this is not so. I mean, it cannot be overcome.
Anders, are you looking? Are you just look? You have a question? Or are you just looking? Okay. No, I mean that's obviously a very big thing that we'll have to consider in drafting for master franchising, for example. It's. I mean, are there other provisions? If you were going to say, I'm from the U.S., right? I come to you with my franchise agreement that I want to use, or for the EU. Or what are the other? I mean, we've talked about online, and so of course, but from a contract drafting perspective, are there specific things that you think you will be doing very differently at this point?
But actually, it was already like this before, in the sense that there are some changes in there, but of course the choice of having a franchising, selective franchising applying, in most cases, in my experience, nothing is said in the contract. It is not, there is not a clear choice in favor. In some cases, yes, but in most cases, not a clear choice in favor. And in any case, normally there are not problems because of the close relationship, so normally these things are handled in any way without particular problems, in the sense that no franchisee would really make a cross selling with with master or other franchisees, and so in practice it is not. But the rules are those. So in principle, you shouldn't impose such restrictions. Then, of course, the reality is different. But of course, in the contract, if you make this choice, you cannot. You should provide these rules, and and of course, but yeah, it is. In practice, I haven't seen really cases, but of course, if some franchisees decide to take an actions against you and try to exploit all possible issues, that could be, one.
No, I agree. That it's kind of a lot of what we're hearing. I think is this was already the case before, right? So it's maybe drafted differently, but it seems like, thankfully, a lot of things will stay the same. So yeah. So any more questions? Otherwise, it's time for a coffee break. Yeah. So I would ask you, if we could be back here 20 past, so we can start on time. Thank you.
Thank you.
comunque proprio tutto questo.
D'Italia.
I enjoyed very much the article you sent me yesterday night.
Wasn't it?
Very good. Very good.
It's very. I mean, it went into detail,
No, it doesn't
but
matter.
it's.
Some of the ideas were very good.
Oh, yeah.
At least I can put it,
Oh,
and if you want, you can.
let me
go
do it. That
with
would be
this.
actually great. I can do it once you put it on.
Or I can sit there.
I can.
That'll be perfect because we can put it and see it too.
Excellent.
That helps us see because this is.
I'll give that one back
Do
to
you
me
want
then so I can
water,
follow along.
Alan?
There. Pardon?
Water?
I can.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's just this. You just go like
Down.
this,
Exactly.
Perfect.
okay?
Perfect. Here, you know what? Let's move one down.
All right. We will.
Are we moving one step?
Yes.
Sorry.
No problem.
That's the most important
Yeah,
part of the
yeah.
day.
So I took my COVID test this morning and
Are you all right?
I
We
am,
don't need COVID
but
tests
I
anymore.
woke up and I saw it, but I already had
Oh,
booked
you'd already-
it,
yeah,
and
yeah.
you know they came to my hotel at 8:30. And
Well, it's good to know you don't have COVID then. Or maybe.
I
or
just
everyone
had it
does.
from the from
the
hit,
ultimate
you know,
authority.
from this group right here.
This is yours, man.
Oh, that's.
This is
thank
the
you.
guy, the guilty guy.
No, his whole
you mentioned
practice
this.
had it. Yeah,
Well, this is a little.
Very dangerous people.
I think they're still out there.
Oh yes.
Let's see. Well, we're gonna run behind here because nobody's here, so
Shall we wait perhaps a bit?
maybe a few
I'll wait
minutes.
a couple minutes. So what does it say? They found. Yes, that's what it means. I was actually writing a text with them today. I just spoke with them. They said like 30 minutes ago that the luggage.
Okay. So the rest of the people who are still out there drinking coffee are missing out. Welcome back to our workshop. We have really, I think it's good that they fed us before this session because we're talking about restaurants next. Restaurants, how to manage the relations with delivery platforms from the franchisor's perspective. And very lucky to have Alan Greenfield from Greenberg Traurig with us. He's from my hometown of Chicago as well. And Cristobal Porcio, who's definitely not from my hometown, but a little bit further south from Chile.
A big fan of Chicago.
There you go. So, gentlemen, take it away.
I still take it I'm not from Chicago.
Well, neither am
I'm
I,
from
so-
Miami. I can't.
I'm from,
Okay, let me just.
fine.
I
I'm from
do love
Stockholm.
Chicago, but I'm not. from
okay. From our adopted hometown. This is our adopted hometown of Chicago. So yeah.
It's a
yeah,
very
yeah.
contentious point in my house.
I'm very sorry. Alan from Miami, who lives in Chicago, and Cristobal, who has Italian roots but lives in Chile. So there we go.
I'm just playing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for joining. Today's conversation, we intended to be a conversation, our presentation, but it's also, we wanted to take a bit of a deeper dive into the changes we're seeing in this space, right? So today's agenda, we're going to talk about the current trends by delivery platforms, the challenges that we're seeing based on these current trends, and then steps that franchisors, our clients, can take to hopefully reduce some of the challenges and the potential for disgruntled franchisees. So, what we've talked about, when Cristobal and I were putting this together, we're seeing a complete shift in the dynamic of the relationships, right? Delivery originally started off as a service, right? It was not cannibalizing the franchisee's business and their sales and their revenue. And it was something where, if we recall, before COVID, right, companies, and we talked about this very briefly, it came up in yesterday's conversation, they were trying to figure it out, as we heard. And they were working on, right, in the beginning it was, the delivery platforms went to your franchisees, and we had to resolve that issue. But then it was the franchisors took the approach, well, we'll approve one provider. And then it was, we'll open it up to any of these providers, optional still. And then it actually became a requirement that the franchisees use any of these delivery providers so long as they operate in their territory, which for the most part, it's all of them, except if you are where I live now. We don't have any. Not Chicago, Colorado. And so, we've seen this shift, and that's why we say the changing times, right? And COVID accelerated everything, some say by at least a decade. And what it did was, right, it really put these delivery providers into a different space of power, if we want to say, where, the franchisors, the franchisees, we needed them. And these companies, they're technology companies. They're Silicon Valley, well-financed companies. They're no longer, you do have startups, but they're really startups that are based by, franchisors are creating their own, trying to work to finesse the challenges with the margins and what they're dealing and competition and whatnot. And so you are seeing this whole shift, and it's continuing to shift as we're going to talk about, right? You now have these service providers who were providing a service are now operating dark kitchens themselves, and they've been doing so, and we've been talking about the conferences for the last 5 years, right? But you're seeing, again, well-financed companies who are doing this on, in various countries, right? The Middle East has some very large players. England has some large players who are also operating in the Middle East, right? You had Reef, who's backed by SoftBank, who's one of those that are now trying to expand around the world. And every deal that they negotiate in the U.S., right, they're now asking for worldwide rights, or at least rights of first refusal. And all of that was actually a product of COVID for them, because they had, right, all of this unused parking lots, commercial parking lots in the United States, where, right, during the COVID 2.5 years ago, no one was going to the office. So Accelerate, right, SoftBank and a vision of, we're a technology company. We operate these commercial parking lots, and we're going to use that as a platform. And look, they're still refining their model, right? And continuing to refine their model. We've done countless deals against them, and their model looks very different from when they started to where it is today. As do their in-house counsel, as do all their documents and everything else. They're going through their cycles. But now, dark kitchens, and we'll talk about that, the challenges that it's creating by these service providers operating them. But there's now what we're seeing is the sweating the assets, we'll call it. And that term, I don't know if you all are familiar with it, but it's what you're seeing is they're now using the information, right? They're data companies that they've gathered to approach restaurants to say, your kitchen isn't being utilized during breakfast or during lunch. We have all this data that shows we should operate a burger restaurant in your kitchen or during lunchtime, or we should operate, right, a breakfast offering in this area. They don't care about the restaurant. They're just, see, that's one of the points we'll talk about. They don't care about the franchisee. They just need the space, right? And that's creating a problem which is absolutely contrary to the franchisor-franchisee model, right? The franchisor and franchisees, historically, they need one another. Right? There's a mutual interest, although the franchisor dictates they need their franchisees to develop their brand, right? There's a common interest. With these providers, that common interest is no longer there. We're interjecting a third party that they just want the space, they have the data, and they'll figure it out. And they'll, it's changed. And so there's a different approach in sweating the assets. It's, some franchisors are bringing this as an alternative to their markets. Those are the larger fast casual that have been struggling drastically during the pandemic. And then you have some franchisors who actually are bringing that as a value add to their system who's suffering. And then you have the delivery operators going to others and trying, kind of like it was when they first started delivery, where they're out there, it's a little bit of the Wild West, but they're smart enough now to know that there are franchisors and they're going to have to engage to convince them to do this.
And just before we go to the other slide, we all in this room, independently of the fact that we may represent franchisors or franchisees, we're basically used for 40 years to a relationship between two groups, creating an alliance with a magnificent recipe that, if it was followed, it would be the key of success, or should be the key of success. And now, without asking, we see that these two actors, franchisor and franchisee, have a third guy or lady in the middle making some noise, like the mosquito at night. That's absolutely intolerable.
I had that a couple nights ago.
Sorry. And it creates doubt. It's and sometimes they are definitely very strong, because we have a title, Dark Kitchen, and one would think of a couple of slaves in the -8 preparing the hamburgers just for one hamburger to eat for the day. Sorry to be so candid and politically incorrect, but coming from Chile. But no, they are, as Alan was saying very well, they are huge companies, knowing exactly what they do, hiring amazing lawyers to go through the VBR, BVV, all these letters we saw this morning, and able also not only to make a complication in this apparently peaceful relationship that was perfectly straight with up and downs, but provoking a question and many questions that are to be solved. One, because your kitchen is not used enough, you should do much better. And the other, because the rules you are bound to could be reviewed. And sorry, go.
No, and that's it. And on this, to expand on your point, though, I think in particular when we talk about sweating the assets more in a minute, I do think, like the delivery in the beginning, I think it's going to, this is, right, we're talking about trends, and you know, dark kitchens is important, but the most, I think, future trend that we're going to see is what's the right approach, and is there a right approach? And just like we saw with delivery, it evolved, and I think this is going to continue to evolve, and so we wanted to use this presentation to, you know, have an open discussion as to what you all have seen and what your experience are. Sure.
I just want to add to the discussion that, driven largely by COVID, the business between the franchisor and franchisee has changed materially as well, where restaurants would be doing 10% delivery sales. Now some chains are up to 50 and 60%. So the business of the franchisee and the franchisor has changed. You don't need a 6,000 square foot dining room anymore because people are not even bothering to show up in the dining room. So the business has changed, and that needs to be.
But you're right, John. But the difference is, historically, as the business has changed in a franchise model, it was the franchisor and the franchisee working through those issues, right? You now have this third party, as Cristobal points out, the Mosquito, who has a lot of power because of what you just said during COVID, where sales, you know, may have shifted from 10% to 50%, who is interjecting themselves from a powerful position and going to the franchisors, right? And okay, they say, well, we have data, or you need us, and here's what we would like, and you know, we'll pay you X, right? That's attractive to some, and so they're finding the right, you know, point to interject themselves into the franchisor level, which isn't in the best interest, perhaps, of the franchisee.
Absolutely right. I still view them as, let's say, a competitor, a competitor supplier, where you don't have a lot of choices.
Yeah.
So they have a lot of, that supplier, if it's a monopoly supplier because of technology or whatever, they have a lot of power.
But 4 years ago, they weren't a competitor.
That's correct.
They were one of our vendors. They were one of our service providers, right? All of our contracts at that time did not have delivery provisions, right? We relied on, right, our operating standards and our, and we relied on other provisions in your franchise agreement that just talked about we have the right to dictate vendors. And that's what we relied on. Now every franchise agreement, right, has a robust delivery provision that talks about the territories, and they may compete in your territory, and right, we may allow others to deliver within your territory, right? It's evolved.
We used to have that as well, but in a very narrow sector. I mean, there were chains that were delivery based, and we had all those robust provisions.
Yes.
But we didn't have it for everybody.
Correct.
Whereas now everybody's doing it.
If you remember, Jimmy John's, right, was one of the first ones years ago in the sandwich concepts, right? That's what made them unique, right? Freaky fast delivery. That was their model.
And the interesting and tough thing probably is that this third actor enters into the game in a time of weakness, because you have all the franchisees struggling, saying, I'm not able to get to the goal I've promised and I've signed. The franchisor saying, look, I understand COVID, but I want my money back. And you have this Mosquito again say, I can't find a solution for all of you. It's super dangerous. It's like the ones who sell for 1-800 and you buy the whatever you can buy there. Yeah. But with a lot of power of money and power on information. They know exactly what do we eat at what hour of the day and what we would like to eat at what hour of the day.
And for when we say a Mosquito, look, we understand there is a need, and we understand there's a service being provided. What though? I do believe, and I share Cristobal's view, right? And look, it's the way of capitalism, and it's the way it's been, right? these companies are seizing upon an opportunity. It just happens to be an opportunity that puts our whole model in jeopardy in terms of how to make it work for the franchisee, who is the basis of our franchise model. And so, you know, just for a moment on the dark kitchens, right? You know, these, what we're seeing, right, what we're talking about, they're much more established than these third-party kitchens. These are companies now, the delivery providers, as we said, right? They are asking for rights to entire countries, right? And if you have we were talking yesterday, and there's deals that we're working on where, right, you have an existing master franchise, or either a master franchisee or a developer, an area developer in a country that has no sub-franchise rights. So it can't even, right, grant a sub-franchise. And now you have the delivery provider saying, well, you know, I'll pay you $500,000, $1 million, whatever it is, or how about this? I won't pay you a thing, but I'll commit to having 300 dark kitchens in India, you know, open over the next 18 months, right? Because they have an established platform. And by the way, they happen to be backed by the largest investments banks. If you look at, you know, and that's a whole nother negotiation, but if you look at their ownership structure, they're backed by the most well-known investment banks from Silicon Valley and in India. And so, right, is that competing with your franchisee who, you know, has been developing stores and is dealing with the pandemic and the challenges they have of opening new locations? And how do we, and we'll, you know, we get to, you know, methods of trying to address these issues, but how do we address that? Does the franchisor just enter into a separate agreement, or do they amend their relationship with their developer to allow sub-franchising rights, to allow them to receive some of that benefit? Which, by the way, I've done both as options.
Or do the franchisor and franchisees become somehow one actor together with a counterparty, which is this platform? Because it could be perhaps a solution to continue navigating with this long-standing relationship that appear to be perfectly stable. But the power in front is so heavy that let's see for the best for the brand owner and the franchisees if it's possible to continue.
And there's benefits to, as we're saying, you know, there's benefits to all of these, right? They have the valuable consumer data that is very attractive and valuable to a franchisor and a franchisee. You know, from a franchisor's point of view, as the example I just provided, right? 300 outlets in 18 months. You know, why? Because they don't have those same upfront costs and challenges that your area developer who's only been able to open 3 this year, right? Because of the challenges with permitting and everything else, right? The administrative issues that it creates, these companies, right? So a franchisor, right, anytime they're expanding to a new jurisdiction, they have to have the right support team, and do they have the capability to support? These delivery providers, I mean, they don't want the franchisor support. By the way, they know more than the franchisor in this area, right? They're data companies, and yes.
But the one issue, interesting legal issue and business issue that this raises, your example of the data company promising to open 300 dark kitchens in India in 18 months. Well, the problem that presents for the master, the area developer, the franchisor has appointed is these people will be competing.
Oh, absolutely.
With
No
the
doubt.
master. So the master basically is probably frustration of their contract. So you know the franchisor has to deal
Absolutely.
with that aspect as well.
But you have reservation of rights. Is this another channel of trade? You never granted them that right, right? A franchisor under the contract, under these reservation of rights provisions, right, had the right to sell in the internet, on military bases and grocery stores. Isn't the argument that, you know, how is this any different? Yeah, point. But you're right. But that's the whole point about usually, even though agreements had those rights, franchisors worked with the franchisee to find out, you know, a way to where they can both benefit. And in some cases, right, the franchisor may had to have deviated and say, no, we're going to take this opportunity. But there were plenty of instances where a franchisee says, I have this opportunity to expand in grocery stores or in these other alternative, right, venues, and the franchisor said, fine. Now, that's frustrated.
We've seen one instance of a franchisor who has used this opportunity to, in effect, buy out franchisees of marginal locations.
Absolutely.
And put a dark kitchen in the territory.
Well, I've actually a step further. We're working on now, right? I have multiple jurisdictions where the dark kitchen says not only that, in order to get into that market, and they really only care about dark kitchens, we'll commit to brick and mortar.
This is where I'm at, because we've got a very large Middle East. So they're a cloud kitchen. They're not a delivery platform because they contract with delivery platforms. They are financed by something, and during COVID, they worked out, okay, we'll open all these and we'll commit to 100 in Saudi, which they haven't opened a single one. But what they worked out very quickly was there's no brand equity there. So so if you're online and you look at some random American brand, you're like, I don't know who that is. So what you need is brick and mortar. You need franchisees to actually create a store so that people can go and try it first without buying something dodgy online. But what they're now doing is they've bought 60 brands. They are now the brand owner of this. Correct. And they are the franchisor. And they will be the franchisee. They will agree to be, I'll open 5 outlets, brick and mortar, but then I'm going to open 12 clouds, or I'm going to put it in my central kitchen with the other 50 brands that I'm running out of that kitchen. It's turning, however, in the Middle East, it's turning into a huge problem because there is competition between all different brands floating around. You've got this one provider has so much money and so much power now that it's almost like someone needs to tip them off to the competition authority because they are now bullying franchisors, bullying franchisees to the point where I'm getting a lot of potential disputes coming up based on good faith because of English law. We've got English law running under our contracts. And I think it's going to hit the court soon because there's so much power that this cloud kitchen operator is like, well, I know I said I would do 30% weighted average cost, but actually that's not profitable to me, so I'm going to do 25 because I own these other 60 brands and I know I can run it at 20%. So even though I contracted with you for 15 years and I promised all this, I'm not going to do it. What are you going to do about it? And then you've got all this other stuff going on in the background with, I mean, they will in their contract say, I won't open another burger brand.
Exactly.
But 100% they will.
Because
and
they have right, that point there is right. So they have the non-exclusive rights to the exclusive rights to all of these different brands, and they haven't, even though they say they won't compete, they have all of these other brands. But now in the cloud kitchen, I think some franchisors were able to accept that because it's a separate part of the kitchen and we can do it a little different. Now they're committing to brick and mortar. Yeah. And so I had a call 2 days ago, or Wednesday, on this issue, right? It's probably the same cloud kitchen operator in the Middle East who they're approaching the largest of the franchise brands. And wow, look at this partner and look what they're doing in the Middle East. And we're not seeing the same growth because of all these other issues. And they're selling the dream, right? And they're well financed. And look how their operations seem to have it down, very solid. But now who's going to get the if they're signing 60 brands and they're committing to operate even 5 restaurants, which by the way they're committing to a lot more, they say, who's going to get the real estate, right? It's back to the traditional, right, Al Shaya examples, right, way back in the day. Who's going to get the good malls? Who's going to get the premier locations? Right? How do I know they're not going to close my shop down and replace it with the next brand? All these issues they're creating, and they've overcome their challenge. Their challenge was companies that said, well, I need to have a presence. I don't want just dark. Fine, we'll commit to brick and mortar. It's again, they're able to do that. But again, I know we're talking about the challenges because that's a large part of this conversation. But there are benefits, right? More efficient staffing, right? I don't need the same support services for a franchisor.
And we reach a point,
Yeah.
coming back to what, sorry,
5 minutes.
5.
Didn't I tell you we wouldn't get through the intro?
Go ahead. No, but we reach a point
Can I have a little bit more
where
right
you say you commit to brick and mortar, but you could have one unit and all the rest could be, we talked yesterday night of the metaverse, somehow there showing magnificent stuff and having only a dark kitchen and a very strong brand and selling whatever you need, since basically everything is taken to your house and you're not going out.
And there are benefits of sweating the assets, right? Enables restaurants to try to make a profit during their slower hours, right? They're in this model, the delivery providers are saying we will provide you access to this data because we'll show you what sells in this region, in this area during these times and whatnot. And they're saying, well, there won't be the brand confusion because we're only operating online. And so therefore, no one's ever going to know, right? There's no takeout, out of this location or no sit down. This is 100% just online delivery.
But, sorry, how can you keep the know-how element of the contract in this kind of situation that these are operating for several brands at the same time?
So they're actually some are creating their own brands, or they buy the rights to these brands, and these are just 100% online brands. They come up with a name, and it's, making burgers. And there is no independent brand recognition. So it's 100% online. And they say, we want to use the kitchen. They don't care about the know-how. That's the point. Now, the franchisor says, I'm not sharing my know-how with them because, my staff is either operating it or not, depending if they want to. I'm only giving them my kitchen. Basically, they're subleasing their kitchens. That's all they're doing. So they're not sharing the know-how. And the delivery don't
know-how
care.
is a recipe to produce, and the rest is centralized marketing, presenting stuff to customers in a perfect manner.
I think the know-how issue may be bigger in the issue that you were discussing with Melissa, right, about the cloud kitchens. And how do you maintain that if they have 60 brands?
Yes.
But that's,
And that's been that issue, right? Any of the large multi-unit operators in some of these markets, that has been a common issue. And oftentimes one solution we were talking about in this matter is, they have to designate a different head of the business for your brand versus another brand. They can't share that information. They have franchisors are willing to relax their non-compete to only their competitive businesses, to their true competitive businesses, not just any burger brand. So they're finding, again, because they're selling the dream. But, here, since we only have a few minutes, what we've seen, franchisors, here, you want to?
No, go ahead. You're doing so well.
No, stop. You.
No, but basically what at the very end, probably parties to strengthen the relationship between franchisor and franchisee and say how, or find a solution on how the cake can be divided in a different manner. It was thought at the very beginning. And the other thing is probably the last line. It's imagination, imagination, imagination. We cannot, we lawyers, stick to what we have been doing for the last X years. But at the time of drafting, this does not mean, that the contracts will become contracts of 500 pages, because basically it's useless. But we will need mechanisms and solutions to be discussed a priori between franchisor and franchisee to have some flexibility, and or to find a way to deal with this tsunami that's absolutely huge. And then, in other words, the brain has to run. And if we go to litigation, needless to say.
Yes.
I think that one of the clauses we could introduce in the agreement. I think that one of the clauses that we could introduce in the agreements with dark kitchens is the access to personal data. I mean, we know that personal data have a value and they are protected, but normally we don't trade with them. We protect them. Maybe in this type of agreements, we could start considering personal data on consumers and clients as really an asset or a goodwill that can be traded, of course, fulfilling the necessary regulations. I mean, the individuals, when they click, I accept the policy, the privacy policy, they should know what's going to happen with their data. Okay, but maybe it's a way to balance a little bit the situation if we have the power to introduce this clause.
So the larger the systems have negotiate that, the challenge is twofold. Number one is you're dealing with a company who that is their business, dealing with data. So the franchisors oftentimes, while they know it's important, other than marketing, that's not their business. And so they try to stay away from what they don't know, a lot of them, and the risks involved. And, there are some that come in, I'm not, there are always exceptions. But a lot of the other ones, they don't actually want it other than marketing. And so the delivery providers say, fine, we'll give you this for marketing purposes, this limited right. But we own it and we can use it and we'll be the party to sell it. So it doesn't, and that satisfies the franchisor. But yes.
And one complication is that in many times, even if you write down this in the contract, these very interesting and big companies come with the data they already own.
They own it.
And they propose to you, we have the solution since we have the data and you don't. Then we can assist you, franchisor, or you, franchisee, to conquer the world because we own the data already.
And yes.
Yeah, when you talk about dark kitchen, I go very much on the side of Cristobal because, for example, although you have in an agreement the reservation of rights, well, you look at it. Okay, I have reservation of rights, so airports, online. But if you look really what's happening now, online sales is no more reservation of rights. It's a necessity, it's a need. Yes. So, for example, although you have, in my viewpoint, although you have the reservation of rights in your agreement, if you are a franchisor, you cannot hit the table and say, "Oh, I say, you have to negotiate with the franchisee," because if you do not negotiate with the franchisee, at least I'm talking about the Brazilian perspective, you are always under the threat of encroachment. Because I have given exclusivity to the franchisee, for example, in the city of Rio, but we have a competitor, like funding, high, like a guy that does the dark kitchen deliveries, the strong one. Yes. I'm competing. So that's encroachment. So you have to negotiate. That's in my view. Always negotiate is talk. Well, I have the reservation of rights here in the agreement. But we need to talk, and of course explain, the benefits of a third party, leading the delivery, and so forth. That's my viewpoint.
Yeah, I'm going to cut us off here because we do have the last panel and we do have panelists that need to leave afterwards, but we have time for discussion. The next panel is on a very similar topic, as the title includes the word dark kitchens. So, thank you so much.
Thank you, Beata. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
And if you can maybe stay around and be,
we will.
the questions afterwards. So, let me see how we are sitting. We need, where do you guys want to meet? I'm happy to, yep. Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm here.
I can do this, yes. So it's just here.
Where's Bruno?
Okay, up and down? Sure.
Bruno?
Hi. There you are, hiding behind the wall.
Do you want to sit? Yeah. Let's sit there. Thank you. Okay.
I was right behind the column, so I didn't see
Your
you guys.
Highness.
Yes.
Pop out. Oh my God, look
So
at you
if you
with
don't,
knives.
if you didn't have
wrong
enough
program.
of discussions about dark kitchens before,
Alright, we're gonna wait
we
it.
are continuing that discussion now. And the chair of this session is John Pratt, and I will let you do the introductions of the rest of the panel.
Thank you very much, Beata. Let me introduce in the running order Melissa Murray, who is a partner at Bird & Bird in the Dubai office. Melissa looks after the whole of the Middle East and is the go-to lawyer in the Middle East, go-to European lawyer in the Middle East, even though she's not European, she's Australian. But although she's Australian, she is quite nice, okay? So, you know, don't... and then Bruna Valois is an attorney at Vazzy Diaz, specialising in intellectual property law, distribution and franchising. And I am told is a rising star in her firm.
And you're nice as well.
And she's nice.
I'm quite
okay.
nice. So I think
Well,
that's a
no,
plus.
she's very nice. And me at the bottom from Hamilton Pratt.
He's not nice.
In the UK. Yes, as Melissa's kindly pointed out,
Not
I am not nice. But who wants a lawyer to be nice? You've got to be nasty, okay. So what we're going to be talking about is on the next slide. So we'll be doing an introduction and then comparing the situation in the Middle East, South America and Europe, looking at issues, looking at reputation, looking at contractual provisions, both in the existing restaurant franchise agreement and in the agreement to operate dark kitchens. Now, I have to say I was really concerned about our ability to get through the programme, but it was so kind of the previous speakers to have talked absolutely 100% on dark kitchens, which is what we were supposed to be talking about. So we will actually be able to get through it. Our approach is going to be much less sort of theoretical and much more, I hope, practical in terms of the applications. It's a discussion because looking at the audience, quite apart from the fact you're very attractive, you are, I can tell, very knowledgeable on this. So I'm assuming that out there you know much more than we do. So please participate in what we're saying. Right, by way of an introduction, and before we get on to the issues, and largely this has been discussed in the previous session, COVID has been brilliant for the hospitality and restaurant sector. It has been the catalyst for innovation. And numerous surveys have been undertaken. 70% of hospitality and restaurant businesses have changed suppliers or looked at ways of economizing in terms of their supplies. 70% have developed vegan menus. A very considerable percentage are looking at virtual brands that don't have an existence in the high street or in towns, but only have an existence on the internet to add to their high street town presence. And of course, dark kitchens. So I think it's really important to look at dark kitchens in the context of a much broader movement within the hospitality and restaurant sector at innovation and changes. Now, the challenge for us as lawyers, as we heard in the previous section, is to make sure that our franchise agreements reflect this rapid change. Because historically, they don't, although there's the opportunity in operations manuals to change. We are going to have to incorporate in the manuals, in the agreements themselves, that flexibility. Let me just talk very briefly before going on to the issues about why would a franchisor consider dark kitchens. First of all, the attraction of dark kitchens supposedly and I have a question mark over this, is cost savings. Lower cost premises, you don't have to have expensive premises in smart inner city locations, and lower labour costs in producing the food. But against that, you've got much higher, you've got delivery charges from the kitchen, you've got the delivery platform charges, where we see 30, even 35% payments to the delivery companies. You've got the packaging cost, and inevitably you've got the higher marketing costs of making sure your brands are very visible on the internet and the delivery platforms promote your brands as opposed to other brands. And so I am far from convinced that in terms of going down the dark kitchen route for cost savings is quite right. There may well be other views on that. And the other advantage of dark kitchens for an existing brand is it enables those existing brands to test and launch new menus, new products, new brands, without going to the cost of opening a restaurant. So that's our program. In terms of developments and approach, Melissa, is what I've said sort of what happens in the Middle East or not?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because so I've been in UAE for 16 years, and I have a number of local franchisor clients who, because the rent is very high in all of the locations for your restaurant, they're, as a franchisor themselves, so the brand owner, they always had a dark kitchen sitting somewhere in a warehouse area that would do the salad chopping and the tomato chopping and all of the prep and the things, because they've got a small kitchen space and they just don't have all that space, and it's much cheaper. So the concept of having a dark kitchen in the Middle East isn't new. And the concept of having delivery providers isn't new either, in that all of the brands, all of the franchisees, all of the outlets had delivery. It's just that it wasn't coordinated across all these brands. So obviously each individual store had quite high costs of their own motorbikes, their own drivers who are sitting there bored many hours of the day waiting for delivery. Now obviously that's consolidated with these delivery platforms who are making sure those drivers are pumping out 100 orders a day or whatever it is. So in the Middle East, it's just a shift logistically of what was already happening. But like I said in the last session, it's causing a lot of issues with these big players who are consolidating across the market, all the delivery and all the brands, and now themselves competing because now they want to be the franchisee or the franchisor. I mean, I've had conversations with one of the big players who now wants to be the franchisor because they own 60 brands. So they're like, oh, well, now I'm going to be the franchisor for these brands that I own. I'm going to be the franchisee on this level. I'm going to be the cloud kitchen for all these ones that don't have physical outlets. And it's becoming a bit of a mess, is what I'm going to say.
Bruno.
Hi.
South America.
So in South America, I'm talking mainly about Brazil. That's where I have more expertise. But I think the main point over the last 2 to 3 years, basically during COVID, Brazilian Franchising Association, which is an association we have, demonstrated that we actually had a growth of 140% in delivery platforms for restaurants with delivery platforms or that operate exclusively in delivery platforms. But the main thing is that there's no specific regulation, no specific legislation for dark kitchens. They are subject, obviously, to laws of public order, but they fall under the same umbrella as general restaurants. And an issue that's worth mentioning is that these licenses to operate dark kitchens, they vary a lot within Brazil because we're a big country and have different states, and they depend on City Hall. So it's also a bit for whether a franchisor wants to go outside of their home state, that sometimes proves to be an issue because they'll have different requirements. So he can open an establishment or a dark kitchen somewhere else. And yeah, I think that's an issue.
Well, that leads us brilliantly onto the next slide, where we're going to look at the issues relating to dark kitchens.
And Bruno, I think you were going to talk about
Yes.
planning permission and zoning because, as we all know, one of the advantages of dark kitchens is for those countries which are heavily regulated in terms of planning permission or zoning, it may be easier to open a dark kitchen than a restaurant.
Yeah, well, for us, I feel it's a bit of the opposite because, firstly, since there's no regulations, we had two different sides of the spectrum. Which one was that they, when COVID began, a lot of small businesses they created dark kitchens within their homes. So we had like horror stories about oh well this place, this new place, let's call it. Oh, they work from their home kitchen and they started delivering. So that was a little absurd. And on the other side, since there's for example, in São Paulo, we have what we call mixed neighborhoods, which they can have commercial spots and also residential. So a lot of dark kitchens were opening like these industrial kitchens within residential areas, and this became, residents were very upset about that because there's an influx of delivery people. Pricing goes down because now you have noise, now you have, industrial waste, let's call it, so, it just, it still is like that. There's this loophole that they'll just rent out this huge place and carry out an activity that can be considered an industrial activity and not, that shouldn't be in that residential area.
Melissa, you work and live in a very hot country.
Yes.
So food hygiene and delivery is presumably an issue.
So what you were saying about people in their home kitchens, that doesn't happen in the Middle East. And I think the UAE government would stop that very fast if it started to happen. Like I said before, because the concept of a dark kitchen has been around for 10 years, there are laws that deal with zoning and planning, and they were already in place, and so it's not something new that is being adjusted to because of the market. I know in Saudi recently issued a law about, and it's basically exactly what you said, that if there is a company that is running multiple brands out of one outlet, then it's basically a law about food hygiene, consumer protection, and traffic noise that you've got to cater for all of the little motorbikes running in and out of this location. But in Dubai, for example, all of the dark kitchens were existingly in warehouse locations. Because we are in a very hot country, and because delivery also was very prominent before COVID anyway, Dubai, all of the UAE have very, very strict food hygiene requirements. So, pork isn't allowed, but there are some providers who can get a separate pork license, which means you need a whole separate kitchen that sits over there. They're very, very smart with the food tracing. So, for example, I have a client that has a sushi restaurant, and the CEO is explaining to me, and this is after 15 years of trading in the UAE, that she got a fine from the Dubai municipality because this restaurant here ran out of a certain type of sushi. So in her frozen, completely safe vehicle, she transported sushi from this outlet to this outlet 10 minutes down the road and got a massive fine because Dubai municipality are like, no, we trace it from the port, from wherever, to this restaurant, and we know that if someone gets sick from this restaurant, it's this sushi, and you're not allowed to move it here because now if someone gets sick here, we don't know if it's from this restaurant or this restaurant. And it all comes out of the heat because 30 years ago there was a lot of food poisoning because of the heat and the dust and everything. So they're really, really on it. And I even also had a case of a franchisor who they had the shawarma stations, and they had lots of little franchisees that would take a very small space at the end of a petrol station. And then the municipality changed their mind and went, well, actually, it turns, oil drips. We want that turning thing this far away from your cutting area. And they had to close about 20% of the franchisees because they're at the end of a petrol station. There's nowhere else for them to expand the kitchen. They've got nowhere else to go into fuel. So, but the Dubai municipality are very, I would say, active. it can be a challenge because they do change the rules very fast. You'll just get a notice one day saying the rule has changed. But that's also the benefit of, I think, we run under a monarchy and the laws can change very fast because of that. We're not the British system that takes 4 years.
It's not that quick.
Okay, there you
go. The next item is data privacy, which is a particular issue within Europe. And in order to stand some prospect of finishing on time, I'll say nothing more than that. I don't know if you have other issues, but if not, the other big issue that we've identified is reputation, which is the next slide. And I don't know, Melissa or Bruno, if you want to start off on this, or do you want me to introduce and then you correct the rubbish I come up with?
Sure.
Well, the issues in terms of reputation are, first of all, increasingly in dark kitchens, there are modifications to the menus. I mean, clearly some menu items travel well, others don't. Some menu items or menu items contain elements like lettuce and so on that can wilt. And so increasingly, existing franchise or hospitality restaurant businesses are changing the menu. Now, that's great to facilitate delivery, but causes problems in terms of people associate a brand with the food that they've received from a delivery platform, and that can have a negative impact. The delivery effect, we've talked about food safety, having tamper-proof delivery boxes, ensuring temperature maintenance in the delivery vehicle, and of course traceability, going back to Melissa's point. Environmental issues, there have again been a number of surveys highlighting how environmentally unfriendly delivery is, especially if you're using vehicles rather than electric vehicles or bicycles and so on. And packaging, most packaging is plastic or some form of other non-recyclable impact. And then in terms of other, treatment of employees.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Go on, Melissa.
With the other, oh gosh, because during COVID, everyone was delivering. I mean, and it was silly. I was watching my neighbours getting 4 or 5 different deliveries all turning up because every individual family member is ordering something different. And so it's not a consolidated order. Although now the cloud kitchens have created their own, what they call mix and match brands. So they put a whole bunch of different brands and you can actually get 4 or 5 different brands in your one delivery now. So they're clicking on to stopping that. But the amount of motorcycle accidents on the roads was horrific during the last year, to the point where the UAE police have got now consumer awareness programs, basically, of watch out for the motorbikes, and trying to teach the motorbike drivers watch out for cars, because in the Middle East we all have big cars, and of course, I don't know why, motorbike drivers love sitting in your blind spot. And we just had so many motorcycle accidents, and quite horrific ones. So I'm expecting, because we don't have dedicated like motorbike lanes yet, but I'm expecting that to come, and I'm expecting new road safety and police sort of laws to come out about this. I mean, there is even one brand who actually like did a lot of marketing around please be safe when you're on the road, for watching out for our motorbikes, because they had a lot of deaths of drivers. It's horrible.
Yeah, actually, this is very interesting, because in Brazil, I mean, delivery people aren't directly, most times aren't directly employees of the dark kitchens. They're a third party hired, but there is a recent law in Brazil that now requires dark kitchens that operate within delivery people. I mean, delivery guys in Brazil, we call them motoboys, because they're always on their bikes, so it's like bike boys, that they must get insurance for them, specifically because of the amount of accidents that they were having. So now Brazilian legislation requires them to have insurance from either the dark kitchen that's hiring them from a third party, or from the the online platform that does deliveries. So that was actually very interesting for us.
And that's an interesting point. I mean, if you're a franchisor and you're operating through dark kitchens, third-party dark kitchens, you want to make sure that that insurance is in place. Next slide, in terms of the contractual issues around the franchise agreement with a franchisee's restaurant. And to some extent, this was touched on in the previous session. I mean, the starting point for existing franchise agreements is to look at the exclusivity clause. I am horrified often at the lack of care taken with exclusivity clauses. Very often they're drafted in a way that would inadvertently, or perhaps at the time intentionally, prevent a franchisor who's granted exclusive rights to a franchisee from opening a dark kitchen in the territory. So in terms of going forward with franchise agreements, territorial rights, clearly franchisors in this sector need to look at whether to grant franchisees delivery rights, or is it going to be limited to dining? So you need to give very careful consideration to what rights are granted. Now, I don't know what Melissa and Bruna think, but I mean, I am not now seeing in fast food or casual dining franchises rights to everything being granted, and the right is very limited to a dining experience at the premises. Is that?
Again, I mean, because delivery was already quite prevalent, the franchisee did have the rights for delivery. So now it's up to the franchisor and the franchisee together to work with a delivery platform, because I'm distinguishing here the cloud kitchen provider versus the delivery platform, because we do separate them. We have a number of providers who are just the logistics of the motorbikes and the picking up. They are not a cloud kitchen. Then we have separate cloud kitchen providers who are the ones that contract with the delivery platform in order to get the food to the customer. So I am separating them out. So franchisees did have the right to have their own bikes and do their own delivery, or now contract with a delivery provider, but together with the franchisor, because again, like as was discussed in previous, the franchisee does not have a right to license the trademark or the brand, and so all that marketing that goes on the delivery platform actually needs franchisor consent.
Melissa, because the franchisors could still control vendors, that's how they could then interact with and determine which platforms were going to be used, even if those rights were granted to do delivery.
Yeah, and I mean, most franchisors that I was dealing with were not too upset by the franchisee contracting out delivery, because it's coming out of the franchisee's costs anyway. And they already had those costs because most of them were already running their own motorbikes. And so now they're just consolidating. So they're actually balancing it out, the costs, or saving a bit of money, because now you don't have drivers sitting there bored half the day. So it wasn't so much of a problem either. So what I'm seeing is franchisors that will still grant a franchisee their location and their territory and their delivery area, but then contracting with a cloud kitchen in an area that a franchisee probably wouldn't be successful, those sort of dead areas, because obviously the Middle East is quite large, there's a lot of desert, and there are a lot of areas where, yes, there might be villas and that, but it's not necessarily a good location for a franchisee to have a dine-in physical outlet, and that seems to be working.
Bruna.
Yeah, I think for us, there's another issue that, I mean, we had obviously delivery before. That was something that was practiced. But an example I want to give is that we used to have, for example, there's a sit and dine restaurant which did not operate with delivery, and they might have a smaller capacity sit and dine restaurant which had delivery, or that maybe exclusively operated under 4 deliveries, that at the time wasn't called a dark kitchen, but that's what it was. And then suddenly during COVID, everyone wants to go online because you don't have any more clients that are going to your restaurant. So what happens when the sit and dine restaurants that previously did not do deliveries, when they want to expand, what type of work they're practicing? How do you and maybe they wanted to deliver into a route that was already covered by the other establishment. So, and that wasn't foreseen in the franchise agreement. So what happens? How do you determine, what do you do in a situation like that? How do you determine, I'm only going to go up to this neighborhood, or I'm going to deliver from this neighborhood on? And how do you limit the franchisees' scope of and territorial right, which was already acquired beforehand because they already covered that area? How do we still don't really have an answer for that?
I'm going to say from a Middle East perspective as well, I have had a conversation with one of the delivery platforms, and their technology is quite smart, and they can map out, and they know that if someone's living in this area on their system, not to show certain restaurants and not to, and they can map out where that person's house is, obviously, because they know the delivery, and then they can know that the royalty should be this franchisee or the franchisor or not. They're getting quite smart.
Oh, wow.
Maybe they always were, I don't know.
I just want to add a twist to this, and that is that most platforms in their systems do not, either by design or otherwise, permit the segmentation of delivery territories to match the territories granted under the franchise agreement to specific franchisees. And that's a major issue that basically needs to be addressed by negotiation. Because the territories were granted for delivery areas based on pre-platform knowledge. And platforms will tell you flat out, we are not observing your territorial restrictions in your franchise agreement.
And John, that's a very good point, because those franchise agreements adopt the rather old-fashioned approach of including delivery. At the very least, if you adopt that old-fashioned approach, you need to have different, areas for delivery or not opening.
Well, and they did that for legitimate reasons.
Yeah.
It was part of the economic model.
Indeed. Moving swiftly on, because time is against us. And before we get to that slide, Melissa, you're just way too keen. I've noticed that in you.
Sorry.
Encroachment and fair dealing. What I don't know, and I open it up to everybody, is the extent to which those jurisdictions where there are rules against encroachment and those jurisdictions that have much more active fair dealing, good faith obligations than we have in the UK, the extent to which dark kitchens cause problems under good faith and encroachment. I mean, maybe we just raise it as an issue, but certainly I would very much welcome input from the audience or people here about what is that something worrying. And then lastly, marketing funds. If I was a franchisee and I was obliged to pay money into a marketing fund to promote the brand, but I was restricted to dining, I would be pretty upset if the franchisor's business model shifts towards dark kitchens and away from dining. And I don't know if those are issues that Melissa and Bruno have come across or can add anything to.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because on some of my cloud kitchen deals, the cloud kitchens are paying a marketing fee to the franchisor and saying to the franchisor, you go off and do all this marketing and make sure that so that we're building the online sales. So it's kind of the same model, I guess, of the franchisee putting in, and it's all brand awareness. But like I said, most of our franchisees aren't limited to just dine in, and I actually don't think any franchisee in the Middle East right now would accept it. I don't think they would, because they know, I mean, especially because delivery has always been a part of the model, and sales would be 50% easily. Some brands are 70% delivery, and they have very small dine-in. So, I mean, unless you're a location sitting in Dubai Mall, where all the tourists will go, a lot of your sales are delivery. So, yeah.
John, on your encroachment question, I've actually seen several franchisors intentionally not want to get involved in understanding the data of how the delivery area is determined in order to avoid any claims by franchisees that it is assisting and encroaching upon their territory in breach of their agreement.
Does that get them off the hook, Alan?
I mean, it hasn't been challenged, but they have, I mean, they'll say specifically, we, in the negotiations, we want no access to that information just for that reason. And then on the, I've actually seen on the marketing part, not just the paying in like a typical franchisee would. There are some agreements out there, right, where they require the franchisor to spend a specific amount of money in marketing each month, which you know, again, it's amazing to me what they're commanding at times.
I've got a cloud kitchen provider which is upset with the franchisor because they haven't done enough marketing, or to their threshold. They have done marketing, but not to their threshold. It's like, okay.
Alessandra.
Yeah, what's about the franchise format which only provides for dark kitchen franchisee? Is this a franchise or it's...
Indeed, and that's potentially the next slide. And
okay,
indeed,
sorry.
No, you want to know. And indeed, what we're seeing, and again, I'd be interested if we're seeing this elsewhere, is dark kitchen franchise brands are being established, so that you know the franchisor is simply an operator of dark kitchens for any number of brands, and franchisees, it will appoint franchisees to operate the dark kitchens. It will provide the brands to the franchisee operating the dark kitchen. And
what's about the know-how?
well, there are all sorts of very complex issues concerning know-how. Now, Beato is giving me the evil eye, which means that we have... Oh, that was a smile. Oh, I'm sorry. I've never been very good at recognising women's looks.
You're on a roll today.
Okay. Moving swiftly on. We've reached our time limit. There was, in fact, another slide about ghost kitchens, but I think that's a whole... contractual arrangements with ghost kitchens. It's a whole different session, and we better stop there. So.
I will just quickly say on that point, Bart, that in the Middle East, it's not a franchise agreement, it's a service contract. And the cloud kitchen will provide you with their standard 3-page service agreement that says, we'll cook your food, someone will deliver it, but we are not a franchise. And we don't actually, like, all the things that you would see in a franchise agreement are pretty much carved out. So, yes, you give us your menu, we'll get a chef to cook it. We don't care about confidentiality, know-how, all that sort of stuff.
Oh, wow.
And then it's just a service contract,
No, in Brazil, it's absolutely a franchising agreement, and I mean, mostly under business format franchising. So we do operate like that.
There you go.
Yeah, I think it's much easier for franchisees.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
You have to run, right? Yeah. So we are losing John right now, actually.
It's
but
no
Which is not
great
a bad
loss.
thing.
Oh, Melissa!
Because you've not been very nice.
The only reason I said nasty things about Australians is that my grandfather was Australian, so I thought I could say that. She's not going to forgive me now. I'm in real trouble.
Don't invite him back.
No, but we do have time set aside now for discussion. I think what we could do actually, since Alan and Cristobal didn't really get a chance to take questions, I don't know if you want to come back up here and we can do a joint.
I think Alan's walking out the door.
Oh, Alan's leaving as well. Well,
he's holding the door.
Oh, he's holding the door. He's
John.
trying to get John out of here. Cristobal,
That's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Cristobal, there he is up the back.
Cristobal, do you want to
Do you want to come back up and answer any questions?
Yeah.
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 Do you want to come back up and have questions?
Yeah. I'll move out of the way.
No, he'll be John Pratt. Nice version of John Pratt.
Yeah, you can be the
How about this? I will sit in the middle, and Alan, you'll get to sit. You'll get to be John Pratt, I guess. So there.
There we go. So can I insult everyone?
No, I think Beata gets to now.
I get to insult people? Oh no.
You're
Well,
in the
I'm not really
chair.
good at it.
I'm
Well,
John.
I just do it in my head. I don't usually do it out loud. Yeah.
You got me on the way out.
Almost worse.
Well, so let me give the floor to the audience. Yeah.
Yeah, most of the jurisdictions, they have this requirement of the franchise disclosure. And let's say you have a physical restaurant, and then you have a franchisee, and you want to expand into a new business model, which is the online. So how does it work for you, in each jurisdiction? Do you have to deliver a new disclosure, or the one that was delivered prior to the agreement for the physical restaurant suffices, is enough? How does it work, like in Australia, Brazil, and US, and
I'm not going to answer for Australia because I'm not fully up.
Okay, sorry.
But so Saudi Arabia is the only one that has a franchise disclosure law, and it only came in 2 years ago, and so a lot of the models that are new. But the way that it is drafted, if you're changing the business model, you would need to give a new disclosure. But every other GCC jurisdiction, we don't have a franchise disclosure regime.
Absolutely. In Brazil, when you're significantly altering your franchising format and you're expanding, or even so reducing sometimes your activities, you need to send out a franchise disclosure document to your franchisees.
To new franchisees or to existing?
To existing franchisees, I'm sorry. To your franchisees, that's what he said.
Address the U.S.
We can vote.
Yeah.
I've seen several different scenarios in the U.S. One, it depends how similar the product is, that we have exemptions we can rely on. Sale to an existing franchisee, for example. I have other clients that do have a separate FDD they have a brick and mortar. They've then created multiple dark kitchen brands, and they're selling their franchisees this other brands to operate in their restaurant. So they're okay with the know-how because they have a separate franchise agreement. But the reason why they have an FDD and aren't relying on their exemptions, sometimes they'll sell them at the same time. So therefore, they can't qualify for an exemption because in the U.S. you have to operate for at least 24 months in most states to qualify for that exemption. And so if they sell a dark kitchen and the brick and mortar at the same time, they don't qualify. And so they have an FDD in order to be able to sell more than one. And then recently I've seen some companies, one particular comes in mind out of Florida, that says they've structured it in a way where they're saying we're not a franchise at all because they're messing with the payment flow. Where the franchisees aren't actually receiving any of the money. They're being paid a commission to operate a ghost kitchen in their restaurant. And so there's no payment of a fee. And in the U.S., if there's no payment or any, it's a pure commission. And it's a very short agreement, and then they have a terms and conditions on their website. And so they're trying to structure it around being a franchise.
And I would just say in general, when you're making such, we talked, if we tied the different sessions today together a little bit, we've talked about, well, especially the first session, Eduardo talking about, Eduardo talked about an additional investment required of a franchisee later on, for example. And to me, this is a little bit in the same vein that even if it's maybe not required to have a disclosure, it's probably smart to have a disclosure, because then you have somebody, they can't come back and say, I didn't realize, I didn't, there's value in disclosure. Internationally, I often recommend, for example, even when there isn't a disclosure obligation in a country, to have some kind of disclosure, because it helps create a record of what, you knew this, we told you this, you decided to sign the agreement, now you don't like it, well, that's on you.
There's pros and there's
No,
there's
I
a big-
know,
because if you
I know,
have a
yeah.
misrepresentation
That's-
issue,
yeah.
or
No,
so
of course,
like,
of course,
you know,
I don't disagree, but-
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I
You don't?
say no.
Yeah, I say no as well.
Oh, okay, well, I mean,
I've seen both ways.
Yeah.
Depends on your client.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What do you mean misrepresentation of what? I did not get really.
Oh, that if you provide a disclosure document and then there's an issue, it didn't turn out that way, you as a franchisor may be sued for a misrepresentation that you made early on. But yeah, so better to be quiet than to speak is what you're
Yes.
saying. Yeah.
Because
Your document is your selling document. It at least says, this is what I told you.
if
Yeah,
you
it's
say
pretty
in your
fair.
disclosure document, I received no rebates, and it turns out you now receive a rebate, or stuff like that, you open yourselves up to additional litigation.
I was going to say, in the Middle East, we usually say no. Apart from Saudi, where you have to, we say no because things change so much, and they're a long-term contract, and you don't want something in 10 years biting you.
Oh.
Yeah.
We'll get into the drafting, how you draft that in a
Yes.
different session. But yeah.
I have a question which goes a bit further. I think you have said that it is necessary to give a separate disclosure when the system is materially altered. From a German point of view, I would say, when the system is materially altered, modified, it is probably necessary to conclude a new contract.
Yes, but
How do you see this?
A lot of the times, these additional investments, especially if the franchisor is making it, it only requires nominal equipment changes, if any. And so, you would argue, is it really changing the business? It's not requiring much of an investment, maybe $1,000 or $2,000, like one comes to mind. What are they changing? They're already offering delivery, so maybe they're originally offering burgers or barbecue, and now they're offering chicken wings. Is that really a fundamental change? I guess it just depends.
So actually that raises an interesting question. So what if you're not offering the franchisees to enter into this additional agreement, but you're requiring them to add it on, right?
I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah.
We constructed a system like that. So during COVID, because of these are full service restaurants. So during COVID, franchisor introduced a handful of new menu items that they branded individually. And so under the agreement, we required the franchisees to sell these particular items using their existing kitchens, sold through third-party delivery apps. But because we branded each item separately for third-party delivery purposes, we then reserved the right and created a separate franchise system under a new name that also offered each of these restaurant items, which would be sold as separate franchises with disclosure. But for the existing franchisees, there was no disclosure. They were just required to operate and sell these new menu items using the delivery platforms and the new branded names within the existing franchise system.
But was there an additional material investment required
Nothing.
to sell? See, that's
They used the existing kitchen. I think in one of the items they may have needed a new fryer or something for a specific item.
But
that
that's
was it.
the difference, I think, if there's material capital expenditures, redesigning their kitchen or something of that, which I haven't seen. That's the whole point of selling these to your existing franchisee base.
Yeah, the existing grant covered these options within the agreement.
Right.
So there was no requirement to give them disclosure. We could require them to do that, but the reservation of rights still allowed the franchisor to then extract those brands away at a different point in time if they wanted to, and then just say, no, now you can't do this anymore because I'm going to franchise this brand separately.
Good luck.
You know, from a ghost kitchen.
Good luck
Right?
taking it away after.
Yeah. Other questions?
I have a doubt. How far within, I mean, the disruptive nature of the dark kitchen. The disruptive nature of the dark kitchen and what's going on with the franchises. How long do you think it will be until it catch up for two reasons? New franchises already know this is happening, so they will ask for the relevant protections. And new brands that are up and coming and know that the delivery systems have a way to input into their operation will be more reluctant to let them be a kind of share participants of some kind of their market, knowing that the consumers build experience with the brand within their brick and mortar premises instead of the kitchen. So it will create certain limitations on the delivery system, or they will demand that they share the data they get from the customers to them, so they have it directly, because, I mean, mostly data sharing legislations, the customers are the owners of the data, not the data providers. So just an open question.
It's a guess. Sorry for running out, but I'm a half allergy and flu and flu. It's not COVID. I had COVID in February. I'm not a dangerous guy at this time. It's a big clue, because you're very right in the sense that all the ones who will come into the business know already what is happening. But on the other hand, the only manner they have to grow is just to enter into one of these systems, but perhaps they will not have all the freedom to negotiate what they have to negotiate. Which means that I really don't know what will we get. Again, I think that we work on good faith in Chile, not necessarily in other countries, but in most of the Latin countries. No, sorry, as a rule of law, as an element of, as principle of law. It's too criminal. But therefore, it will be a question of what you negotiated, what you showed, and what you didn't. And we'll have to work on that basis.
But I think what we're seeing already evolve in some of the more, I don't want to say advanced, but when it comes to franchising, I would say the Middle East has been advanced, right? You had the large multi-unit operators 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I think what we're going to see around the world is the Middle East taking that model, taking the lead. I think I'm seeing it in India already. I think you're going to see it in more of these countries where you're going to have a different franchisee. Your franchisee is going to have to operate both, and that's going to become the standard, I think. And then I think you'll see your existing franchisees, right? Because in Latam, for example, right, you have families that have had the franchise for generations, yeah. And so I think you're going to see them adapt to offer it or enter into arrangements with a provider in their country to offer that. I don't think we'll see the franchisor extracting that right from them and entering into a third-party arrangement. I don't think so, but but as they refranchise and redevelop, I think then they'll renegotiate and find a new franchisee.
Yeah.
That can do both.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Yeah, I think it's hard to separate the value that or the value to the brick and mortar franchisees diluted if they don't jump on this trend, basically, right? So, yeah.
No, I agree. I have nothing to add.
Yeah, and I would say that's what we're seeing, that the split model of franchisees only having dine-in or certain areas, it's causing problems. So I think it will wash out in the market soon. And any of the new deals, it's always the area developer is the one that's going to be running the cloud kitchen as well, or signing up with the third-party cloud kitchen. Because if they're not going to open the cloud kitchen, they're going to sign with a service provider who's running 60 brands out of a cloud kitchen. It's going to be the franchisee who's going to be managing that relationship, maybe together with the franchisor, because I have seen tripartite agreements where it's franchisee, because also in the Middle East, we're talking about sophisticated franchisees.
That's what I was
They,
gonna think
they
of.
are not, they have got big legal teams of 5 or 6 lawyers. They've got 200 brands of their own. They're not, it's also one of the reasons why we don't have a lot of franchise disclosure laws, because they don't need that franchisee protection. So they have a lot of bargaining and negotiating power as well. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if some of these masters start creating their own cloud. Well, and I had 8 years ago a master franchisee in Qatar who had 7 brands, and they were all like, one was a sandwich, one was a salad, those kind of brands. And that's exactly what he was trying to create his own little cloud kitchen for the 7 brands. And we were negotiating with the 7 franchisors saying, by the way, there might be a bit of cross-contamination of, because the lettuce that you all use is going to be the one type of lettuce. Sorry if it's not the lettuce that you like. But yes, we will keep your special sauce in this drawer, and we'll keep your special salt in this drawer, so that we don't cross-contaminate. And I mean, that was 8 years ago. And I think some of the big masters will start maybe even creating their own cloud, and they'll be running 8 brands.
But for example, when you talk about Brazil, that has a continental territory. Some of the franchisees, they do not have the power, the finance power, to expand from second one for a second unit, or even create an online. You see what I mean? So they're usually
So they need
small.
to contract with.
So the franchisor will maybe hire someone, a third party or another franchisee, to go to the online platform. That's how I view.
That will be the
Just a compliment.
That will be the bifurcated model we're talking about, where they have to figure out, the split arrangements, whether it's the franchisor or the franchisee. As long as you have unsophisticated franchisees, I think we're going to see that.
Yeah.
And I would agree with the fact that Melissa and Alan was pointing out that we all think, perhaps with the first European perspective, that the franchisee is a guy who had his savings and started working as a franchisee. In most of our jurisdictions, some of the franchisees are much more powerful than the franchisor. The franchisor has an amazing brand, and it's an illusion if we come to Chile. But the franchisor owns banks, newspapers, a line of franchise, because one of the daughters or sons just like the brand.
They're
Which
conglomerate
means that-
families.
Pardon?
Yeah, they're conglomerate families.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
And then finally, it will depend again on the contract.
Can I just I'm from Sweden, and we don't really see this development with ghost kitchens. We are aware of that it's coming, but is this the same for all countries? That in Italy, for instance, do you have ghost kitchens?
I haven't seen so much. You have more?
Yes, there are
In
some.
Poland, we don't have dark kitchens, but we have dark stores. It's very popular around Europe now, and we are talking about, and we are still talking about how should we regulate these dark stores as some kind of delivery, not platforms, but some kinds of pickup points for the big chains to delivery directly to the end consumer. So not dark kitchens, but dark stores.
Yeah, we have that in Sweden as well, but it's just interesting to see what is driving the ghost kitchens.
I took a walking tour here in Madrid, and one of the interesting things that the tour guide was saying, he says, here in Madrid, now I understand there's people that know better than me, but he said, if you notice, look at all the restaurants and bars here in Madrid. He says it's very hard to fail in a restaurant and bar in Madrid. He said, and this is what he said, here, a lot of people, they don't want to spend time in their small apartments. They spend time on the street and cafes. I think in those jurisdictions where it is more natural, more common to socialize outside and have these long lunches and beautiful times, which I wish we did more in the U.S., I think it will be slower in those jurisdictions. Why? Because it's part of the culture.
Yeah.
So maybe ghost kitchens aren't as needed here in Madrid, for example, and will be slower. And maybe they'll eventually come as generations change, but it's part of the culture. I don't know if you disagree, but that's what I think.
No, I mean, there are plenty of dark kitchens are starting, and in fact we start having problems with planning and zoning, residential neighborhoods really contesting the implementation of this industrial one. So it's been for a couple of years starting to be an issue actually. Although we go out, we like to go out and eat and socialize, but ghost kitchens are a reality already in the big cities in Spain.
I would say
we have the same problem in Poland with these dark stores because they are usually located in the center of the city. It's a huge area of really dark windows, and we are trying to avoid to developing this area in this center of cities, and the government is trying to find solution to forbidden to locate these dark stores in the middle of the center of the city, rather abroad the city.
Yeah, it's interesting in the UAE now, like because it's still predominantly shopping malls, the landlords are now requiring any of the restaurants to have separate access for the delivery drivers because they were always walking through the middle of the mall. And so you've got this guy with his helmet walking through in all his motorbike kit, walking through, and then walking with his bag of food, walking through the mall. And I mean, Dubai Mall's huge, so he's doing a 40-minute walk through the mall, 20 minutes there, standing there, 20 minutes out. And in our office building, like for Bird and Bird's offices, the delivery drivers are not allowed to come in through reception. They have to go through the service elevators. And so you get a lot of phone calls going, where am I going? How am I going to get to you? And then you go meet them out in the hallway because they can't come to your office. But because it's so prevalent, and I mean, even in our office, if we've got 20 staff in for the day, there's 20 lunches being delivered and 20 drivers turning up delivering food.
One thing I want to note is that franchisors are also changing their models in response to these new developments. So there are clients who are going in the QSR sector where they would have had 40, 50 seats in the dining room. Now they're going to virtually no dining room. So instead of 2,500 square feet of space, you need 900 square feet of space. And it's virtually all takeout. And the other thing is there are some franchisors that are going to a smaller footprint, but with drive-thrus, so that they are able to meet the economic pressures that are presented by the new, by the changes to how the business is conducted.
We have the cloud kitchens now creating a front of house. There's no dining. But if you drive past, you could stand there and order on your phone and pick it up yourself. So now you've also got a cloud kitchen provider that previously had no branding, have its own branding, having its storefront so that you can collect. And when Dubai had Expo 2020, Talabat, which is not a cloud kitchen, it was just a delivery platform, it created its own big stand, so when you were walking around Expo you could on your phone deliver it, order it and then go collect it, and they had little robots which were very cute that went around Expo delivering people's food, but because Expo was about technology. So it's interesting all the different iterations that are popping up and the blends of models.
I completely agree, and all of this talk about dark kitchens is making me very hungry. And as it happens, it is 1 o'clock.
There you go, on time.
Are you giving Melissa the evil eye?
No! The only person I gave the evil eye was John.
Yeah, and John deserves
and only after he was being nasty.
I'm sorry,
so yeah. No, but thank you to all our panelists today. Thank you to the audience for participating and being so actively involved. And yeah.